Hi, I'm Teresa Hansen. I'm the Vice President of Global Content for Clarion Energy. I'm here at DISTRIBUTECH 2020 in San Antonio, and I'm here with Jeremy Klingel, who is the Global Head of Distributed Energy for Black Veatch. Jeremy, thanks for joining me.
Good morning, thank you.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the next generation grid. You were mentioning to me a little bit about that, so can you just tell the audience what the next generation grid is?
In its essence, the next generation grid is more than just utility infrastructure. We talk about all these buzzwords of digitization, of commercial industrial customers, new renewables coming online. How is that interplay going to work? And then what is the role of a utility? Obviously, today, carbon neutrality is table stakes. Quite frankly, we have to move to a point of how do we make that economically viable? Not just green for the sake of green, but actually something that we can build a business model around. And that means we need to create a new market. And utilities are front and center on being able to do that. In the sense that they have the infrastructure at their disposal, they have a voice within the regulatory model. How do they be able to pull that together to better serve their customers and create a platform where we can have not just conventional generation, but renewable assets, distributed assets, intelligent assets, all work together?
Okay, so how do you think we're going to get there? I mean, obviously utilities have a lot going on right now. They have a lot of challenges. So how are utilities, as well as other industry, going to get to that?
In order to move there, you have to parade out where you're going to get the most value. Where's the most the ROI? And yes, there is that conversation of how do you take CO2 and create ROI, but really it's reliability and resiliency. And I've seen that is probably one of the few areas where utilities can not only add value that everybody wants. We see all these compelling events from a natural disaster point of view. We're looking at it from a global warming point of view. Those are all things that resonate not just with customers, but also with regulators. And so utilities have been struggling to find new earning mechanisms for the past decade. We've gone through the energy efficiency phase. We've gone through aging infrastructure, and that's an ongoing battle. But what's one thing that everybody sees as having intrinsic value, and that's reliability and resiliency. So how do we start to wrap those services? And as we get, we're not just talking about storm hardening, we're talking about the integration of rooftop solar on someone's home. There is the secondary concern there is the vulnerability of having all these connected assets. From a cybersecurity point of view, it creates new risk. As we can harden those assets, you take them and it becomes a million points that could become problems, quite frankly, into a large flexible grid that can, in essence, handle a pretty major punch. It is that first step to a self-healing grid. And so that is an area I think that we're going to see a lot of focus. We're already seeing some regulation in the Southeast change to allow utilities to capitalize and earn on additional resiliency, but it's also based on merit. It's performance-based. It can't just be I installed new infrastructure. It's I installed new infrastructure, and there's a cost-benefit analysis to that I can prove out that I'm minimizing my outage minutes, I'm providing better service, I'm providing more flexible solutions to my customers, and that's a piece that's becoming real. We've talked about it for a while, but it's now right on the forefront, and it's a really interesting ecosystem because it's not just utility infrastructure. If we're going to do this, it's going to take a cast of characters. We end up having to have there's software layer, there's hardware components, there's private equity investment. There are a ton of players that were not there en masse a few years ago. And so these emerging technologies that are coming on the scene are really changing the game. And I think the utility's role is to become that orchestration layer. We always talk about distributed energy resource management as a software play. How do I go and control all these little assets? How do I curtail and create demand response events? It's really much more than that. It is creating that marketplace and then driving the players and creating an opportunity, an economic opportunity for customers, for these emerging technologies to actually interact. And that connective tissue is something that's, I think, going to be front and center to the business case for utilities and the business models, moving forward in the coming decades.
Okay, well, let me ask you one more question. You mentioned regulators.
Yes.
So, and I know obviously regulators have to play a role in this. Utilities can't do all this by themselves without the proper regulation in place. So can you talk a little bit about that in North America or in the US, where you're seeing pockets where this is really working well or where regulators are getting on board?
It is starting, and the pockets, of course, you can always start with the coasts.
Right.
But I think what's interesting, if you look at regulation in general, they are customers too. So as we explain the value from a utility point of view or from a technology point of view of why looking at performance-based rate making, or why the adoption and capitalization of these new technologies that eventually, yes, customers are going to have to pay a piece, they have to show that cost-benefit analysis. And so in California, one of the biggest questions right now is we bring storage onto the grid at grid level to help with outages, to attach to substations for black start capabilities. We can actually tie an intrinsic value to that, and plus say, look, now we have a new flexible resource that I can put out there, I can use from a resiliency point of view, but also there's a market component. And I think showing that continuum of, I'm not going to put this single point asset out there that has one use that may or may not ever be capitalized on, but say there is a much broader value chain. And so in the Northeast, in Florida particular is one that is pioneering that resiliency and reliability as a service, to where they're allowing utilities to spend additional capital in order to harden their system outside of their traditional rate case. And so you're seeing that happen. I think it will be driven from the coasts and obviously the areas that are prone to these compelling events, climate change, et cetera. But that does not preclude the rest of the country. And I'll tell you, there's some very innovative hotbeds. We're sitting in one right now with San Antonio and really Texas as a whole. You look at what Houston is trying to do from the proliferation of electric vehicles at the fleet level and build that into the utility infrastructure. What CPS Energy has done here, and we looked at, we heard this morning about their play to integrate renewables. That is, regulation is at different levels. We talk about public commissions often. It's also that municipal level. And so we talk about public-private partnerships. They're starting to become a reality.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy, for being with us today. It was great.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.